I awoke underwater. It was warm water. It was salt water. I was naked and alone. I'm not sure how many times I had been in this position, but I was being reincarnated again. The sun was coming up. Soon I would need to get out of this water and start my next life again. Maybe I misspoke. I would continue my life. I'll explain. I was born so long ago that I cannot remember the number of years that have gone by. Maybe 3,000 to 4,000 years. Every time I died or was killed, I woke up later in a warm pond of salt water located on a small island somewhere in the world. It was like being reborn, except that my body was returned to that of an 18-year-old in perfect health. I remembered everything from my previous lives. I forgot nothing. Each time I was reborn, those past lives moved further into the back of my mind. The older memories faded from the forefront. They were clear and could be pulled forward, becoming stronger if I worked on remembering. I knew that soon I would be beginning another life. Someone had taken my last life. From past experience, I knew that I would be healed of my wounds completely. My body would be exactly the same as it was over these 1,000s of years. My features would be perfect, my body scar-free, and my hair returned to its original blonde. Any woman would look at me and feel her heart start to flutter. I could look at a woman and have her surrender herself to me. I was that handsome. After living as many years as I had, I was very intelligent. Someone said that life is a great teacher. I had lived many lives, so I guess I was well taught. I raised myself up out of the water and began to plan my new life. For the last 300 years, civilization had progressed so far that now I had to create a paper trail to explain my being here. In my prior lives, I had started this procedure so that when I awakened, I would already have birth records, a social security number, a driver's license, and all those pesky little documents normal people take for granted. I saved my money and I made investments over the years. I had accumulated mountains of money in various accounts because of these habits. I was a billionaire many times over, but I had the money hidden from human eyes. It was split over many identities in many different accounts in many different banks in many different countries. I started to assume my new life. It suddenly occurred to me that I had not died of natural causes. I had been terminated. This was not unusual. I had been executed and had suffered many mishaps over the years. The instant that I died, my body would vanish and I would reappear in this pond. Only this time it was different. I was terminated by my loving wife, Kelly. I began bring memories of my past life to the forefront. I needed to know why she cheated me because I might need to protect myself from her. I wanted revenge. So I started concentrating on how it all began so I could make my plans. My past memories of Kelly drifted into my conscious mind. The memories started with me visiting one of the many businesses I already owned on an inspection tour. I had a lot of businesses I'd accumulated over the years. My habit was to buy and sell my existing businesses to myself. I know it doesn't sound right, but just think every 100 years or so I had to die or people might start noticing me. So I sold my current businesses to other business I owned under my next identity, and on it went. Because of my physical regeneration, no one alive at the current time would still be alive when I reappeared. All my old friends and companions would have long since died by time I showed back up. And if anyone was still alive when I returned, who would believe the ramblings of a 100-year-old individual? They would listen to the person and then dismiss their claims of me being old as just dementia. The only thing I had to do was be careful of photographs. And even the few that snuck past my scrutiny were not usually believed by anyone who saw them. People naturally thought that they were seeing lookalikes or distant relatives. No one lived that long, or so they thought. There were times over the years when I visited women I had really loved. These mates were usually on their deathbeds. I just stopped to say goodbye and make their passing easier. Most died happy, because I appeared to them in my reborn state. I looked to them as I did 50 to 70 years before when we had met. I would sneak into their rooms at night, hug them, kiss them, and welcome them into their new life. For them, there was no new life, but the important fact was they died believing. They died happy. They did not fear death at that time. It was the only gift I could give them for sharing their lives with me. Over all my lifetimes, I never fathered any children. My wives tried and I was very happy with their efforts, but alas, there were no offspring. I had long come to believe that whatever gave me eternal life also kept me from passing that gift on to any offspring. Medical science grew by leaps and bounds over the years, and my sterility was tested. The doctors concluded that I was fertile, but for some unknown reason my wives could not conceive. Oh, we tried everything, IVF and donor carriers, nothing worked. My sperm all died trying to fertilize an egg. I knew nothing would work, but I tried for my mate's mental health. Occasionally one of my wives became pregnant. We both knew it wasn't mine. Most left me in shame, some tried lying, and a few took their life because of their shame. I felt no pity for them because they tried to cheat on me. They got what they deserved. Anyway, back to my story. I was visiting a company I owned prior to selling it to myself. It was a nice little business, but it had become bloated over the years. If I sold it, I could reduce the bloat as a new owner always did when they merged. The good people stayed on, the bad, well, this was the survival of the fittest, 20th century style. One of the executives had a personal assistant, Kelly, with him as we toured the facilities. She was about the prettiest thing I had seen in a long time. Her boss was an idiot, but looking at her made my time with him almost palatable. Every time I glimpsed at her, I was greeted by a smile. The merger went as planned. Her boss was separated, and Kelly was assigned to me. So began our romance. We traveled the world together. As I had planned, we only saw the most beautiful and romantic places. I wined her and dined her, but made no moves on her. I was always the perfect gentleman. We stayed in the best hotels, in their best suites, and always traveled by private jet. She was always on my arm wearing nothing but designer clothes. She saw the real power of wealth. She was hooked on everything money could do. Kelly watched the big man tour the company she worked for. He was handsome. That was the first thing she noticed. Her boss had been living in fear of his visit for weeks since it was announced he would tour their facilities. She liked her boss. He had taken the place of her long-dead father in her heart. She did not like his nervousness. The big man finally arrived. He was polite, projecting a very strong aura of power. Everyone walked on eggs around him. She watched her boss reduced to a blathering idiot when pressed to answer a few in-depth questions put to him by the big guy. She tried to protect her boss by flirting with this arrogant a-hole. It didn't work. Her boss was still crushed under questioning. She watched as her boss became a shell of his former self. She developed a hatred of the new guy. She vowed to get even for the destruction of her substitute father someday. 6 weeks later, the merger was completed. Her boss and substitute father was terminated. The terms of his separation were more than fair, but he was only a shadow of his former self. He had lost his wife and daughter to a drunk driver. His job was the only thing that kept him from losing his mind. 2 weeks after his firing, he committed suicide. She vowed revenge against the new owner, not only for destroying her dad, but for not even noticing his death. About a month after the funeral, much to her surprise, she was asked by HR to report to corporate headquarters in New York City. She was told that the big guy wanted to interview her for a possible executive position. They sent her home to her apartment to pack an overnight bag. At 6 p.m., a limo picked her up and deposited her at the foot of one of the corporate jets. They flew to New York City, and she was set up in one of the corporate suites in the Plaza Hotel. She had a very poor night's sleep because of her nerves. The next morning, she was up, dressed, and looking very beautiful when she was picked up, again by another limo. She was driven to a private club and escorted to a private dining room. There she found the big man. He was impeccably dressed and appeared to be waiting for her. As she walked over to the table, he rose and introduced himself. "Hi, I'm Tom Darby. Thank you for joining me for breakfast. May I call you Kelly? And please call me Tom." That's how her new life started. He invited her to accompany him on his business day. He had asked her to be his PA, but first wanted her to understand how much work it really entailed. By the time the day was over, she was hooked on the power and luxury the position afforded to her. She accepted the job. It was every woman's dream job, plus it kept her close to him so that she could plan her revenge. Kelly soon gave up her old apartment and moved into a suite in the hotel. A few days after moving in, a fashion consultant and personnel shopper showed up at her door. The woman explained, "Hi, my name's Megan. Mr. Darby hired me to update your wardrobe. I just need to learn your sizes and tastes before beginning." Kelly was stunned. She gave all her personnel information and was told to go take a shower. When she finished her shower, She found Megan waiting in the bedroom with loads of boxes. "These are some selections and intimates for you to try on," Megan explained. Megan helped Kelly started handing her garments to try on. She stated that Megan needs a bit grooming. She got on her phone. While she was still trying to regain her senses, a crew from the salon arrived at her door. Megan invited them in, and Kelly soon found herself getting a hairstyling, manicure, and facial. 2 hours later, Megan was finished with the makeover. Standing in front of her mirror, Kelly realized that she was in fact beautiful. She could not believe the change. As Kelly marveled at her transformation, she felt that Megan was correct. Megan started helping her try these garments on. Megan was like a crazy woman. Clothes or garments that Kelly thought were perfectly acceptable were called garbage by Megan and discarded. It took all day, but finally Megan was happy, and Kelly's walk-in closet was full of both business and evening attire. And then there were the shoes, purses, and accessories. It goes without saying that Kelly was overwhelmed. Megan charged back into the bedroom and started attacking Kelly's closet looking for the perfect outfit. Why? Because Kelly was to accompany the boss to dinner at his club at 8 p.m. When Kelly arrived at the club, she was treated like visiting royalty. They opened all doors for her and escorted her to a private dining room. As she crossed through the main restaurant, she felt all eyes on her. The men were in awe and the women were envious. Kelly loved the feelings she was experiencing. When they led her into the private dining room, she found Tom standing beside the table waiting for her. He looked so handsome, perfectly groomed and in his expensive tux. He was smiling at her. She felt her heart melt. He walked over, took her in his arms and kissed her cheek. "You look beautiful tonight. Thank you for joining me for dinner." Kelly felt excited. "Damn, he's getting to me. This will make my revenge a little harder," she thought. They had a very enjoyable meal. When the limo arrived back at her hotel, he kissed her on the cheek and walked her to the doorman. As much as she wanted him to, he did not attempt to join her in her room. "Damn, I'll need a cold shower tonight for sure," she thought. Kelly found herself traveling with him to all the beautiful places. His businesses were varied and all over the world. Kelly found herself loving being with him. Where they went, he was always treated like a visiting god. And by association, so was she. Kelly had been his PA for about 6 months when she decided to move the relationship up a notch. She had a rough plan for her revenge and wanted him nearer to her. They were in a hotel on the Italian Riviera. They had a 2-bedroom suite. After a day of shopping and looking at all the beautiful sights and a fine dinner, Kelly decided that tonight was the night to implement phase 1 of her plan. That night, when they had adjourned to their respective rooms, Kelly took a long, relaxing bath and then after some time, she walked into his bedroom. He was awake as she expected, still working. He took one look at her, and he carried her into his bed. It was a wonderful night. He was a wonderful lover. From that point on, if they were together, she never slept alone. Less than a year later, they were married. "We were great together. We never argued. We never fought. We were the perfect couple. So why did she take my life?" Tom thought. Tom pondered while he was being regenerated. "My business plans should be working. All my companies were being transferred to holding companies where they were automatically protected from being looted by my wives or my trusted employees. Unusually, my spouse died before me, so these plans were not normally needed. Hey, I was a mortal. Once in a while, I was killed in a plane crash or car wreck. And in these cases, my wives were allowed to keep receiving incomes to live on while I, under a new identity, ran my businesses. But this was the first time my wife was responsible for my death. I felt the need for revenge against her even more. I got out of the pool and looked around. I was familiar with the surroundings. The pool was located in a secret location on an island I owned in the South Pacific. No one could see me as I walked to the house I had built there. I put my eye to the electronic security system. It beeped, indicating that it recognized me. I liked these new electronic gadgets. They were much easier than hiding a key under the mat and much more secure. I walked in and fired up my satellite communication system. Soon I had a signal and was booting a PC to check on my companies and how the transfers to new ownership were coming. Well, I was surprised when I found that nothing was happening. I looked at the date and realized that I had been dead about 6 months. All the assets should have been transferred by now. What went wrong? I started digging into all the automatic controls I had developed over the years. I finally came across the one common denominator. The systems all thought I was still alive in my old existence. Someone was logging in daily to my personal account with my username and password. If I didn't log in daily, the processes started automatically. There was only one person who could have succeeded in capturing my password. My wife, Kelly. The same wife that took my life. I tried to log in as my old self and found that the password had been changed. Someone thought that by changing the password they could keep anyone out. I guess someone had never heard of a backdoor. The first thing I did after logging in was assess the damage they had done to my empire. After a few days, I determined that someone was funneling cash out of my businesses and into offshore bank accounts and how they were doing it. As I examined the programs in operation, I was surprised by how slick they were. Whoever wrote them knew what they were doing, how my corporate structure was organized, and how not to get caught. I began to suspect the individuals behind the thefts, but I needed proof before taking action. I loved this, the thrill of the chase and all that. It had been a couple of 100 years since I was this excited. Unfortunately for the thieves, I owned those banks through a series of interlocking corporations, so I could stop the bleeding of my wealth without alerting them. Another couple of hours worth of work, and I had the money hitting the offshore accounts and then transferring from those accounts to other accounts I controlled. After each transfer, my little program erased all traces of the transfer. It would appear to anyone looking that the transfer never worked. The money never appeared, but it still disappeared from the corporation. If the thieves spotted the missing money, they would have one hell of a time figuring out exactly what was wrong. Once I finished protecting my fortune, I decided to see exactly where I was supposed to be. I knew that all my systems knew I was still alive, when in fact they should have known I was dead. I knew I'd need to rethink the whole system. Maybe I'd attach some type of his heart monitor to determine if my heart was still beating. This was going to be so much fun. Reading my email and my travel plans, I learned that my widow and I were on an extended cruise aboard one of my yachts. We were accompanied by 3 of my most senior executives. I guess I found my culprits. They all knew the current structure of all my businesses. If I stayed dead, they could clean me out. It was now my turn to teach them a lesson. I spent the next 2 days instituting fail-safes so that no one could hack my systems until I figured out a better system. When I got done, it would appear that their plan was working, but in reality it wasn't. Not being able to die had resulted in me developing an attitude toward human life. Because of that attitude, I wanted just to sink the yacht. But then I remembered the 10 crew members aboard. They were just doing their jobs and not involved in my demise. So I had to be a little more subtle in obtaining my vengeance. No sense in hurting innocents. So I started a more complicated plan. The captain of the yacht received a notice from the manufacturer of the yacht, another company I owned, to dock at the nearest port. A structural weakness was discovered and the boat was in danger of sinking in heavy seas. Please return to port for repairs, directed the communication. The boat was near enough to Hawaii, so they stopped there for repairs. The yacht was placed in dry dock, forcing the conspirators to relocate to some property I owned on a small island there. My wife and her partners in crime hid themselves. I guess they didn't want it to be discovered that I wasn't with them. There might be too many questions asked by authorities. As they ferreted themselves away, I started executing my plans for them. Living as long as I had, I learned many tricks. In the Dark Ages, I was a mage. As the years progressed, I became a great archer, a swordsman. With the advent of gunpowder, I became a rifle and pistol expert. I trained in all the oriental forms of martial arts. I had developed into a very formidable adversary. It was through my use of these skills I was going to extract my vengeance. The island I owned was very private. There were all sorts of electronic surveillance and armed guards designed to assure my privacy. But again, I developed the system so I knew its weaknesses. Soon I was inside the compound and hiding in the underbrush. My 3 executives were all between 55 and 62 years old. They had led the good life, and they let their bodies slide into disrepair. My first target was one of the fatter ones. He was ripe for a heart attack, and I was going to help him have one. One of the nice things about being rich was having all the best toys. And boy did I have them. As I watched my fat former friend to learn his habits, I remembered my holographic projector. It was state-of-the-art. It had 6 projectors that projected the image, a very high-quality image. The projectors were very small size-wise, but very powerful. I set them up around the lounge chair my fat friend favored for his evening cigar and cognac. This was going to be fun. The next night I was waiting for him. He dropped in his chair and lit a cigar. I walked in front of the cameras and started talking. "Hello, Lloyd. I'm back." My fat friend Lloyd stared in wonder. When he last saw me, I was a 45-year-old guy with gray hair and age lines on my face. What he saw in front of him was a 20-year-old in perfect health with an evil smile. "It can't be, you're dead," he exclaimed. "Kelly told us she did it." "I know, Lloyd. That's why I came back to get all of you. I want you to join me in death," and I smiled my evilest grin. "Just let me touch you. That's all it will take. Just a brief moment of pain and it's all over. The only problem is that you won't be going to a nice place like I did. You'll be going to the hot place. I understand that there you'll feel pain forever." I continued as I started moving toward him. I could see the sweat appear on his forehead and see his chest straining as his heart beat harder and harder. "No, stay away. I don't want to die," he pleaded. I saw the pain appear on his face as his heart beat faster and faster. He was also having trouble breathing. I held my arms out to him and said, "I didn't want to die either, but you and your friends didn't think of what I wanted. Come to me, Lloyd. The pain won't be that bad." And I made the holographic image walk through some lawn furniture. He rolled off his lounger and tried to stand. He grabbed his chest, obviously in pain, and collapsed on the lawn. I watched as his chest stopped moving and his eyes lost their luster and their life. I quickly grabbed up the equipment and disappeared into the dark. About an hour later, some of the servants came looking for Lloyd. They tried to resuscitate him, but it was too late. He was long dead. I smiled in the darkness, trying to decide who my next victim would be. The next day, I spotted one of my other executives walking on the beach, getting ready to swim in the ocean. Quentin stripped completely and covered himself with what looked like sunscreen. I watched him frolic for nearly an hour before leaving the water and drying off. He swam alone. A plan slowly formed in my mind. I never really liked him, so I enjoyed my plan for him. My first step was to attract some sharks to the area he swam in. Some very big, very hungry sharks. For the next week, I gathered up the discarded meat and fish parts from the garbage. The cooks were always trying to prepare very fancy dishes, so there was a lot of waste. I gathered up that waste and kept putting it in the water near where Quentin swam in the morning. By the end of the week, the sharks were gathering in wait for me to feed them every morning at sunrise. There was something about me that the sharks didn't like, so they stayed away from me as I swam out with their food. As soon as I swam away, they went into a feeding frenzy. I had watched Quentin cover himself with sunscreen before swimming every day. One day, I snuck out of the underbrush and stole his sunscreen. Quentin never missed it when he left the beach. That night, I mixed some of the sunscreen with a fish paste. The sunscreen had a strong enough odor that the fish smell was disguised to the human nose. I knew that the sharks would smell the fish odor through the sunscreen. I dropped the tube near the route he always took back to the compound. I left it in a spot he would notice as he walked to the beach. It looked as if he had dropped it the day before when he left. The next morning, I didn't feed the sharks. I wanted them hungry and hanging around the area. Quentin found his sunscreen as he headed to the ocean. I watched as he liberally covered his body with the doctored sunscreen and then started his swim. He followed his normal custom. He swam straight out into sea for about a quarter mile before turning back. He almost made the turn before the first shark hit him. He started to scream, but was dragged underwater before he could generate any real volume and alert possible rescuers. I darted out of the brush and grabbed the tainted sunscreen. It was about an hour later as I watched from my hiding place. The last of my friends, Martin, walked down to the beach and called out for Quentin. He looked at Quentin's towel and stuff. He called a few more times, looking out to sea. As he was standing there, a really big great white shark broke the surface and rolled on his side. Plainly visible in his mouth was a human arm. My friend stared for a moment and then vomited in the sand. I retreated into the undergrowth. Soon the beach was crowded with police and such. I stayed hidden and watched all the commotion. The police had trouble believing that 2 men had died on this little island in such a short time. They questioned all the help, my friend Martin, and my wife. They were looking for me and couldn't get a straight answer from anyone as to where I was. They had reports from my headquarters that I was on an extended vacation with my wife, but they couldn't find me anywhere. They were good cops and thus were very suspicious, but could find no proof of foul play. As I snuck away, I thought, 2 down, 2 to go. Martin left the island and returned to Oahu on the police launch. My wife stayed on the island. I was tempted to stay on the island also, but I needed to get to one of my computers and start the fail-safe program to begin the transfers of my holdings to my new identity. I'd get back to her later, but first I wanted to cut off their funds and any possible escape routes. I waited a few days and used an outrigger canoe to paddle to a larger, more inhabited island, grabbed a water taxi to a bigger population center on another island, and finally booked a seat on an inter-island flight to Honolulu. I was closing in on Martin. Soon I would have my vengeance on him also. Martin was not going to be easy though. The police were keeping him under close surveillance because he was a suspect in my disappearance. Someone noticed I was missing, as well as the deaths of the other 2. Then there was the fact that he was in the Royal Hawaiian, one of Honolulu's best hotels. He was in a suite on the top floor. It was going to be hard to get to him, but I'd figure out a way. Hell, I had all the time in the world. Kelly couldn't believe how lucky she had become. First, Lloyd had died of a heart attack. He was a weak link in the plan and had to be eliminated anyway. When a servant told her that he had succumbed to the heart attack, she almost slipped and smiled. Lloyd was the computer guy who automated the transfer code. He ran the information systems at the corporate headquarters. He created the methodology for the transfers and then divided the actual coding up among different areas. This way, no one single group was able to determine exactly what the code accomplished. Kelly didn't like him. He was fat, sweaty, and arrogant. He demanded to sleep with her for his cooperation. She needed him, so she complied. She got no pleasure from servicing him. It was just another step in her plan. As she was servicing him one evening, she thought back to her husband. God, she hated that man. Because of him and her desire to get back at him, she was forced to have intimate relationship with this pig. It was another reason to hate him. Soon she would accomplish her revenge on Tom, her husband, and then she would no longer need these helpers. She was looking forward to eliminating all her partners. Lloyd's death due to heart failure and Quentin's death at the hands of a few sharks proved fortunate. Her first and second problems were eliminated. She didn't believe in fortune. If he wasn't dead, she would have blamed Tom. But she knew he was dead. She, herself, had repeatedly stabbed him in the back and chest until he stopped reacting to the knife. She then pushed him overboard. She remembered watching his dead body sinking into the depth, his dead eyes open and staring at the water as it closed over his head. The police suspected Martin. They made him accompany them back to Oahu so that they could continue talking to him and watch him closely. Kelly waited a week before sneaking off the island and disappearing. Tom remembered when one day Kelly suggested to him an extended vacation on our yacht. We'd cruise to all the beautiful places for 3 to 4 months. She claimed that I was working too much and needed to relax. It took almost 3 weeks for me to conclude all the deals I was working on, but eventually off we went. It was just the 2 of us and a crew of 10 to run the yacht. Okay, it wasn't quite as intimate as I would have liked, but the crew stayed out of sight as much as possible. And that was quite a feat for the male members of the crew because Kelly was completely nude every time she went on deck. It kept me very distracted. Kelly had lured her husband Tom onto the boat. They set out upon a cruise to all beautiful places. The cruise was just the 2 of them and the crew. She needed the crew to give them complete privacy to complete her plan to kill Tom. So she stayed naked once they were out to sea. The crew kept away from any of the places that her body could be seen. This fit her plan. It was as if she and Tom were the only ones on the ship. So she set her eyes on a piece of lowlife crew member to use to kill Tom. Her best weapon was to use her body to convince him. So she took the poor fool into her bed. Then she would use him to eliminate her husband. But not all her plans went as she had hoped. When the time came to eliminate Tom, her lover wouldn't follow through. So she went a plan too. She pulled the trigger on her husband when the time came. Tom used his new alias to rent a house on the ocean and another alias to rent a suite in the hotel. In the house, he added some computer equipment so he could watch his business empire as well as sneak a peek on his widow and his friend whenever he found it necessary. In the suite, Tom set up a very sophisticated surveillance system to monitor Martin's coming and goings. I was now waiting for Martin to make a move, so I started recovering emails addressed to each of them from the archives. Waiting for Martin to make his next move, I had time. So I read all the emails. After a couple of days of reading, a pattern developed. It seems my widow started her campaign about 12 months before. She began by luring Martin into her grips. Martin was my most senior executive, and because of that position, he ruled my empire. It appears that I had granted him a little too much power and not enough supervision. My widow, Kelly, slowly seduced him into her bed. Once there, he was hooked. I know how easy it was to become hooked, because I've been in that bed also. When she had him, she began her campaign to steal my wealth. He was hopelessly in love and followed her every direction. Kelly was a very smart girl. She made the plans and Martin saw to their execution. I was a little proud of her. She was very through. I guess I could pick real performers. Too bad I missed the character flaw that made her want to kill me. I would need to be a little more careful in the future when I picked the next woman I'd marry. Soon Martin needed some specialized help, so he brought Quentin and Lloyd into the plot. The four of them developed and started the plan. The plan was simple: move all my money to their offshore accounts in small batches. That way they could steal billions without it being noticed. Only Kelly, my loving wife, knew that I needed to die for the plan to succeed. One night we were on the deck recovering from a very energetic love making when Kelly called me over to the rail to point something out to me. As I looked over the edge, she stabbed me with a steak knife in the chest. As I stood there in amazement as she repeatedly stabbed me, then pushed me overboard and tossed the knife in after me. She made sure no one saw her. The bitch actually watched me sink into the dark water with a smile on her face. I really didn't understand why she looked so happy. I never hit her. I always made sure that her monthly allowance was a couple of $1 million a month. And if she ran short 1 month, I put a few more million in her account, no questions asked. Whatever she wanted, she got. As I sank into the depths, I thought, the bitch has tried to kill me. I wonder why. The next morning, she emailed Martin just 2 little words: "It's done." He arranged for Lloyd and Quentin to join him as he flew out to the yacht. As the Brits say, the game was afoot. They started the money transfers. They wanted to get as much transferred before it was noticed that I was missing. Kelly kept her lover hidden in the main stateroom. She had the thrill of using his body, while telling the crew that I was under the weather and resting in bed. One night, after making love on the deck, she tossed her dead lover's body over the rail. Another problem eliminated. Now all she had to do was eliminate her co-conspirators, and her plan was completed. She had made her plans for their deaths, but right now she needed them for a bit longer. But as soon as their parts in the plans were completed, they were gone along with most of the crew. She planned to arrange to sink the boat. As I read her emails and electronic personal diary, I realized that she was really a heartless bitch. It would be challenging to outfox her. It had been many lifetimes since I had a worthy adversary. This was going to be fun, and besides, I owed her one for the knifing. I guess I'll take some time from my story to tell you a little about me. As you already know, I'm immortal. I have lived somewhere between 300 and 400 years. I am 6 foot tall and weigh about 215 pounds. My body is hard from exercise and looks as if I'm carved out of stone. My hair is a dirty blonde. My eyes, well, let me explain. My eyes are a little strange. They are green. No big deal. But the pupils are where they differ from normal human eyes. If you look closely into my eyes, you will notice that my pupils are elongated slightly. My pupils look more like a reptile than a human. They are not perfectly round. Over the thousands of years, I learned to keep my eyelids slightly closed, hiding the deformity. Once civilization progressed far enough, I started having contacts specially made to hide the deformity so that my pupils looked round, just like everyone else. Because of my eyes, I knew I wasn't a member of the human race. I could never have a family or children. I had to hide my differences. So I was destined to be alone, forever. In my early years, human hunters killed me because my eyes were different from theirs. That's why I learned to hide my differences. I don't know why, but my night vision is perfect. I can see as well in complete darkness as I can in bright sunshine. And for some reason, my sense of smell is like a bloodhound's. It's funny, but for all my differences, Animals like me. Dogs upon seeing me start wagging their tails. Cats are my friends, and all other forms of wildlife greet me. I have no idea why this occurs, but it can be handy. It's funny, but no animal will attack me. Oh yeah, one more thing. I'm strong. Unhumanly strong, well, maybe not as strong as Superman, but I'm no chicken either. A couple of months have gone by, and Martin must have started feeling confident. He started appearing in public. First, it was just a walk on the beach, and then it moved up to lunch at various restaurants on the boulevard, and finally nightclubbing. I was watching him, waiting for a pattern to develop in his movements. As soon as I spotted a pattern, then I'd make my move. One day, one of the alarms I had put on the offshore accounts went off. Someone was trying to withdraw funds from that account. Soon alarms were going off on all the offshore accounts Martin and Kelly had created. Soon the banks were getting phone calls from a very worried Martin. Soon he realized that the accounts were empty. So did the hotel, and he was soon out on the street. I followed him around Honolulu, watching and waiting for him to stop someplace. I noticed him talking very hastily on his cell phone. Since I wasn't on my PC, I couldn't be sure, but I'll bet he was telling Kelly her plans went belly up and all the money was gone. Boy, I wish I could have heard that conversation. Once he hung up, Martin started walking toward Diamond Head. I followed. He spent the next hour climbing to the top. He waited until the tourists had all left before climbing over the railing. He just stood there as if he could make up his mind whether or not to jump, so I helped him decide. I said, "Hello, Martin. Want me to help?" Martin turned at the familiar voice. He saw me. "No, you're supposed to be dead," he screamed, and started backing up. He reached the edge and fell. I listened to him scream all the way down. 3 down and 1 to go, I thought. By the time I was able to return to my island, Kelly had dropped right out of sight. There was no sign of her. I started hunting her down again. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and finally, after about 2 years, I was almost ready to give up. I was enjoying the weather in Cancun. I'd been here about a month and was contemplating where my next stop would be in my effort to find Kelly. I was walking along the beach when I saw her. No, it wasn't Kelly, but a woman who really grabbed my attention. She was beautiful, and she was smiling directly at me. Now, I'm not usually affected by beautiful women, but this one was different. I haven't been attracted like that to human women in hundreds of years, but I was to this one. She walked right up to me and said, "Hi, I'm Adrastia. I think I have been waiting for you for all my life." And then she smiled. As I was trying to come up with a cute line, when she removed her sunglasses, I found myself looking into eyes exactly like mine. She had the same elongated pupils I had. She dropped her sunglasses back over her face. "I've always known you were here," she told me. "I've been looking for you for thousands of years. Shall we see if we are designated to be mates?" I smiled and said, "Hi, I'm Gary this time. And you have a great idea?" We walked along the beach until we found a coffee shop to rest and get acquainted. We drank coffee until we thought our bladders would explode. The longer we talked, the fonder I grew of her. She talked about her existence. She reached womanhood about 500 years ago. At that time, she started sensing my presence. She did not know who I was or how to find me, but she knew I was destined to be her mate. As time passed, she tried to find me, only appearing where I was after I had already left. 2 weeks ago, she felt my presence in Mexico. She was in Oregon. We were close. She bought a ticket on the next flight to Cancun. When the plane landed, she felt me nearby. While she was arranging for a rental car, she felt me nearby. She ran out of the agent's office and started trying to find me. I was so close to her now. Her body ached for me. Then she found me and knew I was the one. As I sat with her talking, I noticed a very pleasing aroma emanating from her, but I didn't recognize the perfume. She must have noticed me sniffing because she smiled and said, "That's the smell of my excitement. Being so close to you excites me." I was grinning from ear to ear as I took her hand and we walked to my rented house. We ended up making love all night and the next morning. I knew we were meant to be. It was the first time I had ever felt this way. I looked into her eyes and felt complete for the first time in my life. She looked back up into my eyes and said, "I love you. Our baby will be a perfect little girl. When we are ready, I'll give you the best baby in the world." I agreed. "You already have," she answered. I looked at her with questioning eyes. We women know when we are with child. Later that afternoon, we got up, showered and ate. We couldn't keep our hands off each other. We went for a walk, holding hands the entire time. As far as we were concerned, we were the only two people on Earth. Come to think of it, we were the only two people on Earth of our kind. Over the next few months, we got closer than I had ever been with another person in all my lives. It was as if we were meant for each other. Her stomach started showing the baby. We were sitting together on the couch one evening when she said, "I just felt her kick. Put your hand here." I gave her a funny look as she said, "Her? Mothers know the gender of our children," was the reply I got. I put my hand on Adrastia's belly and for the first time felt my daughter move. I know I said daughter, but I know better than to question my Adrastia. One night after making love, I told Adrastia all about Kelly. I explained about our marriage and her deceit, how she tried to kill me, how she tried to steal my wealth, how she planned to eliminate her partners and keep everything for herself, how much I hated her and wished for vengeance. Later that month, Adrastia asked me, "Do you still want to find Kelly?" I nodded. "I feel her nearby. Let's go hunting." She replied with a big smile. "I still owe her for trying to kill my man. I think she should suffer." I glanced over at Adrastia and knew she meant exactly what she said. I made a note never to get this woman mad at me. Adrastia and I returned home and sat by a globe in my study. She started rotating the globe with one finger tracing its turning. She suddenly stopped the globe at Greece. She looked at me. She's living on a small island near Crete. 3 days later, we were on a plane heading to the Mediterranean. We traveled by train to Crete. There we set up a love nest in a small villa. We started renting sailboats and cruising the islands. On the third day, Adrastia grabbed my hand and pointed at a small island. "She's there, but I also sense a small presence with her. I think she has had a child." Then she looked at me. "You can't hurt her child. I won't allow it. He did nothing to harm you. And besides, we are going to deprive him of a mother," was her response. I knew better than to argue, so I just nodded my agreement. We spent the rest of the week investigating the island. It was only about 5 miles square and roughly round in shape. It was very rocky and only suited to raising goats and olives. There were some vacation villas on the seaward side of the island. Kelly was living in one of the smaller ones facing the westerly. We quietly rented a villa as far east as possible. We started our plan to make Adrastia friends with her. Adrastia would not let me near her. Kelly would recognize me and flee again. I was not to be recognized by Kelly until it was time for our vengeance. It was easy for Adrastia to make friends with Kelly. All women formed a bond with pregnant women. Adrastia used these natural instincts to make friends with Kelly. After about a week, the two of them were going everywhere together. Adrastia told Kelly that her husband, me, was still working and it would be a couple of weeks before I arrived. So I had to stay hidden in the villa where I could not be seen. I was bored days without my Adrastia during the days, but Adrastia made me forget that boredom at night. So I was a very happy guy. One night Adrastia and I were recovering after love making when she said, "I think we're ready to get even. Then we'll let her suffer a few weeks and execute our final vengeance." After a week, we started phase 2 of the plan we had devised for Kelly. One evening at dusk, Kelly found herself on a bluff overlooking the sea. She stood there watching the water when a little voice in her head told her to strip. She did, not really realizing what was happening. I stepped out of the shadows and said, "Hi, Kelly. Remember me? You killed me with a knife." And then I showed her my eyes for the first time. Her eyes widened into large saucers. Her hands went over her mouth to stifle a scream. She started backing up. She backed up to the edge of the cliff, and I thought she was going to fall. But instead she turned and ran screaming back toward the village. I could have easily caught her, but I was having too much fun tormenting her. The locals saw her running naked through the village, screaming that she had seen a monster on the cliff. She was placed in the hospital and because of her ramblings found not to be of sound mind. She was placed in a mental institution. I visited her a few nights. By the time I was done, her mind was completely gone, or at least that's what the doctors thought. She kept screaming that she saw a dead man and I wasn't human. There was nothing wrong with Kelly's mind. I wanted her to know that I was alive and still out there waiting for her. Her behavior was noted by the staff, and they thought her illness was getting worse. Kelly's son was put up for adoption by the authorities because they felt that Kelly would never regain her mind. Adrastea and I adopted him. We felt her should not suffer for his mother's crimes. We would raise him as if he was our own son. Adrastea and I quietly sailed away from the island. For some reason, Adrastea wanted to stay on my island in the South Pacific, the one I was constantly reborn on over these many centuries. She wanted to our baby born there. One night, we made love in our bed for hours, and I dropped off to sleep. Sometime during the night, I felt my wife start to get up. I started to stop her when she said, "I'll be right back." I was so exhausted that I fell right back to sleep. The next time I awakened, she was next to me in bed. I started to hug her, but she grabbed my arm. "Be careful, you'll hurt her." It took a second for her comment to sink into my foggy brain. I sat up in bed and looked at my Adrastea. She had a small kid getting fed by her. Our daughter, Elle, had been born. I carefully kissed my Adrastea as she tried to show me our child. I looked at the baby lying on her chest. She was about half the size of a human baby. I must have shown some form of concern, but Adrastea just smiled. "She's the correct size. Our children are born smaller so that the mother feels no pain." "But you're 2 months early," I exclaimed. Again the smile. "No, that's the normal time for us. And there's one more thing I need to show you." She unwrapped the blankets from around our daughter. Then I saw it. Our daughter had a small tail. It was sort of cute for a tail, that is. "It will disappear before she is 1 year old," I was told. I touched it, and it wrapped around my finger. I felt a strange tingling in my hand. "Don't move yet. She's learning about you," Adrastea whispered. As the years went by, I always wondered how Adrastea got all this knowledge about our daughter, but she never told me. I watched the children grow. Elle grew into a beautiful young woman, just like her mother. Kelly's son turned out to be gifted. He soon graduated from college and started working his way up in my businesses. But Elle was actually in charge. After all, she was immortal. Before I knew it, 60 years had elapsed, and it was time for Adrastea and I to disappear from this life and start another. Too many of our age group were dying, and we would start to stand out. Elle would understand because she was also an immortal. Our son and his family were normal. They would grieve for us and mourn our loss. For them, I felt sad. One night, as I brought up my plans for our future, Adrastea interrupted me. "I sense another like us on this planet. He is a male, and Elle will find him someday. They will be a pair." "So?" I replied. "So? Don't you know that there is only one pair like us, allowed per planet? We will not be returning here," she stated, as if we had no choice in the matter. "Will we still be together?" I asked. "Yes," was the only answer I got. "Then let us begin the journey," was my reply. The staff found Adrastea and I the next morning when they went to investigate why we did not come down for breakfast. They remarked how peaceful and happy we appeared. Our family and friends mourned us as we were buried at sea. Somewhere in the universe, 2 individuals were reborn, this time together. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.